All right, everyone. Welcome to take data governance and master data management to the next level in EDM. There's been a lot of updates in 2020. The past year hasn't been great for everybody, but as far as EDM and updates, they've done a lot of very helpful things. So I'm excited to share. Very quickly, we'll just go through an agenda here. We'll do a very quick introduction because I'm sure we have a lot of different groups on this phone call, varieties of people who have never seen EDM before, maybe have seen it, but they're just interested in knowing new features. So we'll do kind of a quick introduction so that everyone at least has kind of a small background, an overview of EDM functionality. We'll go through requests and how those work in EDM. Requests are kind of the bread and butter for how EDM works. And then at that point, we'll start getting into kind of the new features. Then we'll move to EDM properties, all the different properties, workflow, the new collaboration feature, and some policies and other items they've updated. Then we'll go into some kind of best practice design concepts, mastering versus shared, distributed, something in the middle. And last but not least, we'll cover automation and have a conclusion slide. And if at any point you have a question, I believe you can type that into the chat, and we'll cover those at the end. All right, so our marketing team likes us to put in these slides. So just a little background on interRel very quickly. We are the 5-time EPM and Analytics Partner of the Year. So lots of awards. We have 6 ACE directors and full service key partners. Lots of experience. We had the first EPBCS, S-Base Cloud, and FCC implementation. So very exciting. If you want to go ahead and take notes or take a screenshot, these are some upcoming webcasts that interRel has scheduled. November, it looks like it's tools and best practices. And then December, it's demo month. So no slides, all just live demos. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll go through a quick introduction of EDM. Our first slide is going to be the most basic concept. What is a dimension? It's basically how your data is grouped or categorized in the hierarchical structure, how it's aggregated. Very important to your reporting and analytical applications. Different departments and business units are all going to have different flavors of these different dimensions. And so that kind of goes into a little bit of challenges. So if everyone's kind of off, managing these dimensions or segments their own different ways, it kind of goes to non-standardized reporting. You aren't really sure what's the correct number. A lot of things are being done offline in Excel. Someone's number might not match someone else's from a different business unit, and so there's really no integrity. There's also lack of accountability. There's no auditing trails. So just lots of real world challenges that can be led into managing these dimensions. So here's kind of a visual of that problem. So you can see here we have planning, app consolidations, your GL, getting some account information from there, trying to go to different places. It's just complex and confusing. It's very convoluted. There's not a lot of security. There's not a lot of checks and balances and validation to make sure that that's all the same. Again, no auditability or tracking of this. And, the single version of truth. What is the correct single version of truth? And so here's kind of a real example. You can see where the SAP balance sheet is very similar but slightly different to the EBS balance sheet. And so really you want kind of a central place to manage those mappings or, however you want to manage to keep everything at least in sync, so we know that all the numbers are going to be the same at the end of the day. All right, and so that is why we have the product EDM. It's kind of your central place to manage these dimensions, those hierarchical structures, attributes. You maintain it all in one single spot, and then it can be pushed out to your different analytical and reporting applications. It's really a business user driven tool. You can have multiple business users in there if needed, depending on your design. And then, of course, that auditability that you would want to have. And here's just kind of another overview screenshot of a couple of the features in EDM. Again, auditability. There's subscriptions, so you can maybe update in one place and have those go in different locations. We'll cover that towards the end of this presentation. There's also an approvals process. So again, just kind of that central system where you can manage everything. All right, so just kind of an overview of EDM functionality for those of you on the call who have not been in EDM or seen it yet. Here's the homepage. It has that look and feel of the cloud applications. If you've been in any of the EPM or any, of the Oracle Cloud applications, they're kind of going towards this kind of tablet-based look. You can see activity. There's some hyperlinks, so this user has a request assigned to them and whatnot. So that's the home page. In EDM, everything is managed by a view. So you have default views for each of the applications that's going to have a viewpoint, or it's basically a tab for each of the dimensions within that application. A lot of people like to do what's called a maintenance view, where if you have several different applications, FCC, planning, maybe you have an ERP system, and they all have their different account dimensions. You might want to have a different maintenance view that just has all the account dimensions from all of the different apps in one single place to do comparisons. So these are fully customizable, and it's just kind of how you group, how you want to see all the different hierarchies or segments together. So within the views, you have these viewpoints, or they look like tabs. So these are each of the hierarchies that you want to manage. So this looks like a default view for the corporate GL application. So you have the account hierarchy, company, LOB, cost center, and product dimensions all within a single view. There's robust search features. So here you can see you look for 2 and everything with the 2 in it shows up. You can download a viewpoint to a file. So you can view it within this GUI interface, web interface, or you can download to a file and see it in Excel. You can also make updates in Excel, so versus using the interface. And the viewpoints, you can definitely customize how users interact with the different viewpoints. So this screenshot has, allowed actions, whether you can add, delete. In this viewpoint, they're not going to let users reorder different nodes or members. They're called nodes in EDM. And each of the properties, you can decide if they're going to be editable or not. There's not a screenshot on this slide, but if you move to the Properties tab, you can decide which order the properties are in, and you can even rename what the property is called. So I have, for example, I have a client that had over 100 properties in a single viewpoint, and they want 10 different users updating the different properties. So we're planning to literally just add in, we're going to group each person's properties together and then add their name in front of the properties that they know it's theirs. So lots of things you can do to customize these different viewpoints or tabs. All right, so new requests, as I said, these are kind of the bread and butter for EDM. So these are how changes are made in EDM. A user comes in to a view and then they select a particular viewpoint. And then they ask to do a new request to make any changes, and then any of those changes will be updated over here. So you can actually rename the request from the assigned number. So by default, it's just going to name it request 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you want to actually go back later and look at the request, it's easier if you've named it. Also, if you're sending out a notification, for example, I have a client that wants to send out a notification to a distribution list, which is about 100 people. So you don't want 100 people using one login, basically. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Using one login to see what the request was done, so you can put a detailed just name to the request. So here you can see changing the property values. You just key in, description, enabled. It can be drop downs for start date and end date. It'll actually display like a date, like a calendar you can click on. So here you can just see there's more examples of property updates. You can keep track of start dates and end dates. Any changes that you make in a request, they're going to be over here on the left-hand side. And then you can click a little hyperlink to navigate to what that request is. Also note that anything in red's been removed, green's been added, yellow has been edited. And then here's more of a hierarchical viewpoint, and you can add a child to add something. For here, it's cost center, so to add a node or another cost center below this team member. Sibling would be to add it at the same level. Insert, move, remove, delete. You can also, as I said, use a load request file. So that's, for example, if you have 5,000 different cost centers that you want to update a single property to, or maybe 2 properties to, you can just upload that for all 5,000 at one time versus clicking 5,000 times in the UI and updating there. There's also invalid request items. So these are custom validations that can be set. And then there's also some system validations. So some checks and balances before someone submits a request. And then kind of the request features. This is the hyperlinks that you click. The second is any issues that you have. Then you can add comments, and then you can view and add attachments. So this is a new feature that was added this past year. This isn't the best example in this screenshot because there's only a single location, but if you had alternate hierarchies or shared instances of a node, you could see any of the other instances or locations that it exists in within this structure, within this viewpoint. Another feature that people really like is that any node that you click on, so here, this is for account 12103, you can see all of the previous history for that node. So here's someone updated description, and here's someone updated end date. All right, and as noted, you can always view previous requests. You just click on the request card. The admins are going to see all requests. End users are just going to see their requests, and you can always click on it, inspect it, download it, and see different information. So here's an example of the summary screen of a request. And this is where it's nice to name the request back on this screen so that you know what you actually did if you're trying to look for it. If you go to the details tab, you can see that these actions were done for these different nodes or products. And then you can expand and see the actual details of what was updated. Some new tabs that have been added fairly recently to the inspector of the request inspector is this workflow tab, which I really love, where you can click on submit to see who submitted it and when, approve, you can see all the different approval processes and close. So this is great, especially if a request gets escalated and you're trying to figure out, okay, who in the process did not approve the request, you can figure out the culprit here. So just the whole workflow history of the request. And then as well as a detailed history. So you can see down here that, all the actions that took place. CREST was created, approved, and then a whole bunch of notifications were sent out. In addition to looking at requests and going in and finding the request and looking at it, there's this extremely detailed audit screen. So for the admins, they're going to see everything about everyone. You can filter by data chain, viewpoint, actions, node, request ID, user, time frame. So this is another of those items that they added in 2020. So this is very great. It's very detailed audit trail. All right, next we're going to go into EDM properties. So EDM can provide, there's different types of properties. So they have core, there's core stats, but then there's also properties that's linked to the out-of-the-box applications. So Planning Cloud, FCC, EBS, and Financials Cloud General Ledger. And those will have, like for Financials Cloud General Ledger, it'll have FCGL dot and then the property name, planning, PLN dot and then the property name. So you can see here some core and core stats properties. Custom properties you can create with what they're now calling a universal application. It used to be called a custom application. Starting August, I believe is when they updated it, of this year, we've started calling that a universal application. So that's where you can create custom properties. So here's a universal or custom application. You can see you can select an existing property. And if you select an existing property, it's going to have some default settings that have already been set up for you, or you can create a new property from scratch. All right, to add properties to out-of-the-box applications, you actually have to go into the node type and add it there. And so that can be used. One that I use a lot is the bottom node stat property. And I use that to base derived properties off that property, but that property is not going to actually export. It's mainly just used inside of EDM. It's the universal applications where you're going to be adding properties that can export. But then you can go into the node types of out-of-the-box applications and add them there as well if needed for something within EDM. Okay, so default properties, there's none, specified, and derived. So these are all, again, they're just default properties. They can be overridden, but I try and always, if I can, have either a default property in there or a default derived property or a default specified property. If it's specified and you have allowed values list selected, you'll just pick from that list. If you don't have allowed values list, you just type in what the default value should be. Inheritance options are none or positional. So that just means basically if you add a property at the parent, it's going to trigger down to all of its descendants or basically everything beneath it. Again, that can be overridden. But so again, just default properties, trying to make the maintenance as easy as possible. Okay, so there's an expression builder. You see here on the right, there's kind of that screenshot. And you can drag and drop or just click. And so it's not really scripting. It's more of just using this expression builder. Pretty simple to use. It was rolled out October 2019. They made immediate updates in December 2019. I know there were a lot more updates in August of 2020 as well. So they're just continuing to enhance the features on this expression builder. So definitely just keep looking out for it, because this is something that Oracle seems to be really looking into and continuing to enhance. And then this example here, it's very simple. Basically, there's a property for Financials Cloud General Ledger for summary. And instead of someone having to figure that out and manually go in and click, I've derived it to be, if it's, you know, a bottom node or a level 0, it doesn't have anything beneath it, then it's true. If not, it's false. And then for everything else, just return true. And then kind of this, just another example, allow posting. It's kind of the exact opposite of the summary property. So if it's bottom node false, then return false, else return true. Another derived property, and again, it's just the default value. It can always be overridden, but another great feature that people utilize in EDM with derived properties is a lot of clients will take some type of combination of whatever the node name is, and then maybe dash description. So that's this example right here. So you can see it says return node name concatenated with space, dash, space, and then description. So here's the description here, and then here's the name here, and then alias default just derives to equal name dash description. And then they have this alias reporting where it's just set to equal the description. So just a lot easier than someone manually doing that every time they come in, taking the name and manually keying in dash and then adding in the description. All right, so here's just kind of a preview of the expression builder. And this looks like it's saying if the node name starts with 1, then return that it's an asset for the account type. So if it starts with a 1, it's an asset. All right, another item that you're going to use the expression builder with is for custom validations. So again, this is that second tab I showed earlier with the explanation point. If there's any type of issues you want to throw in addition to maybe any out-of-the-box validations that are already in place. So this one here is that store names must be 5 characters in length. You basically give it a failure message and what the expression is. It can be simple or complex, and use a regular expression if needed. So actually this one, basically what it's doing, this is a regular expression right here. So if it's saying if it's a bottom node, so it doesn't have any children beneath it, and this regular expression basically means if it's a number, so if it's a bottom node and it's a number, and its length is greater than 5, then return a false validation. So it'll return that message that I put. And then, so that's if it's greater than 5, and also if it's less than 5, it's going to return that validation error. And then for everything else, just return true. And so it's really just kind of an extra layer of protection before the request ever even reaches the approval process. So that's just another tool that Oracle has provided us within EDM this year, so that's great to be used. So here's a real-life example of what we've been going over with. So this is where I have the custom validation to ensure 5 characters. Here's derived properties based on if it's a bottom node or not, and then these have a default value of Y. And then we've actually, this is actually a real example. And for this customer, we've gone into the node type and marked this as required. So basically all the user needs to do is come in, key in the name of whatever the node is. In this case, it's a store, and a description, and they're done. So if we didn't set up those default or derived properties, then they'd have to go in and manually key in each of these each time. All right, workflow. So high level overview, user is going to make a request in EDM. It could be one user. There's a new collaboration feature that just came out recently we'll go through that can be used as well. There's an approval policy. If you've enabled one, you have serial and approval or parallel options. We'll go over those in detail in another slide. Escalation options. Then once the change is committed, if you've set up what's called a notification policy, which just came out in August, you can have notifications sent out to a user. If there's subscriptions, which we haven't covered yet, a subscription is basically just if you have one hierarchy updated, it updates another hierarchy or multiple hierarchies automatically. And if there's any issues, there's something called a request assignee that fixes that. But another new feature they added in August is you can add an alternate assignee if the primary request assignee is out of office. And then you just have nightly automation pushes to the different dimensions and segments to the external source systems. So that's kind of the high level overview. We'll go into those in detail. So here is a new collaboration feature. They're kind of referring to this as the Google Docs of EDM. So you can select actions and then collaborate, and you can select a bunch of different users to collaborate with. And then in addition to that, you can use the @ symbol and tag those users in a comment. And then once you submit that comment, the user is going to get an email and know to go into the request and see your comment. So concurrently, different users can all be making changes at the same time. So this is a pretty cool feature that they just came out with. Anyone they invite to collaborate with can make changes, leave comments, add attachments. If they do it while the person who created the initial request is in there, you'll refresh and then you can see their changes that they've made. And then only the person who created the request is going to be able to submit it. Security and policies. So as of August, they've added, in addition to approval policies, a notification policy. Like security, policies can be set at the application level, dimension level, or if you wanted to get really into the details, the hierarchy set and node type levels. And then there's cascading permissions as well as policies. So if you set the policy at the application level, so if you say 2 people have to approve at the application level, then those 2 people have to approve for all dimensions. If you set it at the dimension level, then it's automatically just cascading down. So any changes made, hierarchy set or node type, you can get very granular and set policies at the hierarchy set or node type level. So node type is going to be any adds, deletes, or updates to node properties. And then hierarchy set is going to be any changes to the hierarchy. By default, they're disabled. You basically just enable them and configure appropriately. So approval policies are a little more complicated. You basically say if it's enabled or not, serial or parallel approval options. You can say 1 approval for group. If it's true, you just need 1 person to approve. If false, you specify the number. Include submitter. If true, if the person is part of a group or is one of the people who's supposed to be approving, then it's auto just included as approved. I usually always set this to true. The only time I've set it to false is when we have a requirement to have 2 different users updating the dimension. And if one person updates the dimension, then the other is supposed to approve and vice versa. Other than that, I always leave that as true. Reminder notification, that's just how many days before a notification is sent if the person hasn't approved it. So they'll get an email And then if they don't do anything, how many days before you send them another email to go and do something. Approval escalation, that's how many reminder notifications before escalated to someone who's a data manager of whatever object the policy is on. And then notification policies, these just came out in August. Very simple. You just say if it's enabled, true or not, and then you give it, you know, any of the groups or users that you want to be notified. So this is another new feature that pretty recently came out. You can actually filter both notification and approval policies based on what action is done. So for example, your ERP team might just care if a new account or store was added. So you would just include add or insert, but then you might have a group that cares about any changes made. So you can, again, use the expression filter to filter this even further, or you can filter based on actions. And this is another new feature that just came out this August that's very helpful. Am I on time? Okay. All right, so here's kind of a Visio of kind of a workflow example. This particular example uses what we call mastering, but which we'll cover in a couple of slides here. If you weren't using mastering, you'd basically just skip step 5, but basically you have the user submit a request, a change or changes, and then optional, they could have other users collaborate with them. In this approval process, it's set to serial approver, where you have one approver approve, then it goes to another approver, they approve, then another approver, they approve, and then it's pushed out to any of the subscribing applications, whatever change was made. And then those changes will get updated by a nightly on-demand push to the external application. So we'll look at automation at the end of this. Excuse me. All right, other helpful admin tools. I wasn't really sure where to put this, but there were just a couple other new features that didn't really go with kind of the flow of the presentation, but I wanted to note that these are in there. So one of these kind of newish features that came out 2020 is lookup sets. So these can be used in expressions. So like here we have string values that are departments on the left, mapped to different tax entities on the right. And then you can use an expression to say based on what, you know, this is, return this tax entity on the right for a property. Appearance, you can do a logo image, so it's going to appear next to Oracle where it says Enterprise Data Management Cloud. You could do a background image, or you could do a theme, dark blue versus sky blue. I like to keep prod and test at different colors so that I can distinguish between the two. Reports, this is another new item that came out. So you have permissions and policies. So those can be by user or by user group. You can look at all the different permissions and policies. And then this screenshot actually shows all subscriptions. So you can filter by application, viewer viewpoint, assignee, and you can see name and description, source target, assignees, and all that good information. So this is another very good, helpful tool that Oracle recently came out with to help with just security and policies and subscription maintenance and handling. All right, so this is another newer feature. You've always had the default assignee. Basically, if you have a subscription and it kicks off to different applications, and maybe there's a validation or something in the downstream application that causes the subscription to not go through if it's set to auto submit, for example, or if it's not set to auto submit. Basically, this default assignee can set an out of office indicator and it's instead going to push to an alternate assignee. So if they go on vacation, they can push those notifications, and especially if anything needs to be fixed, that will all go to an alternate user, or you can do a group or groups as well. And there's an algorithm to figure that out based on the out of office setting and the user preferences. So you can also set your image here, time zone, language. All right, so here's some of kind of the design related architecture questions. Do you want to do a mastering concept, shared, distributed, all of the above? So this is kind of an older term. It's been called mastering for a long time, but basically what the concept is you have a single source that's going to update different target applications. So basically what that does is you can, have one central place of maintenance. If you have, 3 different downstream applications and their accounts are the same, their hierarchy structure is the same across the different applications, you can push those changes to all the other applications. And then those downstream applications in EDM, this is all within EDM, could actually make different changes to those as well. So that's kind of the best practice is for each external application, you want an EDM application for that external application. But then you could, also have kind of this master or primary application where the updates are made and then pushed to the different other EDM applications. And then you can make different changes there. So this is all done with subscriptions, node type converters. So basically you typically point like name to name, or you can add an expression to the name to change it a little bit, maybe add a prefix just on level 0 members. You can transform properties. So for example, right now, my client's using their ERP team to kind of manage the master, the primary application. And they use a description in their ERP system, but that doesn't mean much to a planning application, which subscribes to it. So we basically say in the converters, make description equal the alias default. Automation and collaborative workflow. So the approvals process, you would definitely want some type of approvals process on that, at least, mastering application before it gets pushed to the downstream ones. So here's just kind of a visual of that. So here it's called master EDM application. That word kind of has a negative connotation to it now. I've started calling it the primary application. And then, you basically make a change in one place in EDM. So this is all EDM applications because best design practice is to always have one EDM app for your external apps. So you update in the master, it'll push to the different EDM apps, and then we'll go ahead and push to the external apps. So these are just kind of the questions you want to ask yourself. Do you want multiple targets for each target? How should those changes occur? Do you want them auto-submitted? Do you want someone to always, the request assignee to look at it first? Approvals, not approvals? Do you want to use subscriptions, or do you want this to just be completely manual drag and drop? How does your master receive updates? For example, my current client has a product dimension that they want sourced from EIS nightly. So we have a merge import come in and update this primary or master application. And then those changes get pushed out as needed to a planning application, and then another application, universal or custom that they have. Then you want to decide what type of application you can tag as this master. You could have it be an ERP app. a planning app if you want. I usually use a custom or now called universal application. So just some questions to think about. So some final thoughts is how far do you want to go with mastering? You could do completely distributed, which is kind of the old way, DRM days. You could just have a single EDM master application and excuse me, everyone gets the same thing. Or you could just say, everyone do your own thing. Really, you want to find the sweet spot somewhere in the middle. The design I'm doing at my current client, I really like. We basically have their ERP team managing name, description, and where it lies in the hierarchy, and then that pushes out to 7 different applications, and then in those applications, they go and manage specific properties. So it's a combination of mastering where it's needed, but then still you can go in the individual applications and make little updates here and there. All right, last section, automation. Push updates, pretty much the common automation processes is pushing any updates that are needed from EDM or from a source to, a target, EDM being a target, or exporting from EDM to a target application. There are some out of the box with direct connections, Planning Cloud and FCCS. You can both import and export from the external applications. In Financials Cloud General Ledger, you can export. You can't import, but you can export directly to the UCM folder. Here's another new feature. They've just given you more options for imports and exports. You can customize what columns are exported and in what order. So that's another update very recently that happened. I believe this also happened in August. The tools that are available for automation, EPM Automate, it's pretty much just a wrapper around REST API. So it's the same thing, but it's a little easier to code and understand. So I always try and use EPM Automate if a command is available. If it's not, you have to go to REST API. So for example, Financials Cloud General Ledger, you do have that direct connect to the UCM folder, but you have to use REST API to get it there if you want it scripted and automated. There's also the outline load utility and Maxell. All right, so in conclusion, is EDM ready? I think yes. I mean, a year ago, I would not have said yes, but I think, they're continually making new features to make the product better. And again, here's just kind of a summary slide of all the things that it can do for you. All right, I think we're just enough time to answer a couple questions. Tammy, do you want to read those out?
Sure. Any plans to integrate collaboration feature with Microsoft Teams?
Not that I'm aware of. I that would be a question for Oracle. Does policy and you actually can submit. There's something called Oracle Customer Connect, and you'll just look for EDM. So you can submit that as an enhancement request. And Raul and Anurag, they're the Oracle kind of leads of EDM. They're usually good about commenting back. They'll let you know if that's planned or not. Does policy set at dimension level override application policy or add to it? So if you set the policy at the dimension level, oh, you're saying so there's one at the application level and at the dimension level. I would think that I've never set a policy at an application level as well as the dimension level. So let me look into that and get back to you. I would think the dimension level would override it, but I've taken that down as a follow-up and we'll get that answer to you. Was that it, Tammy? Or here's oh, that was on Q&A.
Yes, that was the last question. And if anybody else has any other questions, you could submit it to the Q&A
Oh,
now.
we had some in the chat too.
Oh.
Uma says, from where can we get the presentation and recording of the sessions? Do you know that one, Tammy?
Yeah, I did respond to
gotcha.
that.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you everyone for your time. I really appreciate all of you being here, and that is it. Thank you very much.